Hello everyone and welcome. I'm Sarah Liz and today we're starting a new series using card sketches. So this is sketch number 1. It's pretty simple and it's an A2 card that has an arch and then some diagonal something, right? And so here's the card we're going to make. Ultimately we'll make 2. This first one is really quick and easy. So I have cut 2 arches using the Spellbinders Essential Arches. I skipped the largest 3 and grabbed the next 3 arches in the set. We're going to use the largest one on the second card, but we'll use the other 2 on both cards. Okay. Then I have the thank you to word dies from scrapbook.com, and I just pulled the thank you out of there, and then the scrapbook.com Slimline strips, and I've cut 5 of them. I really just have a stash of those strips anymore. We're going to start by stamping. This is the Rainbows and Wishes 2 stamp set from scrapbook.com, and it's intended to stamp rainbows, but they fit beautifully and these arches. And so the arch I picked is actually a little wider than the stamp set, but it's super easy to kind of stretch that just a little bit to fit it better. If you're having a hard time getting it lined up, you can use a piece of acetate just covering your arch because the stamp will stick to the acetate a little bit, so it will hold its shape while you close the door of your MISTI. Okay, so I'm going to stamp that twice in some black pigment ink and add some clear embossing powder. That white arch is out of some shimmer white cardstock. I think it's the white gold shimmer cardstock from Recollections from Michaels, right? And it just adds this lovely extra something and it's super easy. I'm going to layer that on top of a slightly bigger arch. It's just the next one up in the step. There are tons of brands that have arch dies anymore. This one's my favorite, but scrapbook.com has some. Everybody, really everybody has them at this point. So use what you have. If you don't have arches, then you grab a rectangle. It'll work too. It's just a jumping off point. I'm following it pretty closely here, but you don't have to. And on the second one, we're going to go a little rogue. Okay. So that first strip is a matte silver cardstock, and I just glued that down. But some of these, I've added some double-sided adhesive. I knew I would use them more because I cut a bunch from my scrap pile if they were stickers and really easy to use. This is the 2-inch double-sided tape from scrapbook.com. And I want to say it was like $12 or $13. It goes on sale a lot. So if it's more than that when you're looking at it, just give it a week or 2. It'll go back on sale. And I have been super, super pleased with that because it makes everything a little bit faster when I'm in a rush. I was making thank you cards for teachers. And so the goal of this card was to keep it super quick and easy and something I could mass produce if I wanted to. So I have cut a panel, an A2 panel of some light blue cardstock, and I'll just add that to my card base. And then I'm going to center my arch with my diagonal stripes in the middle of that. And I wasn't following the sketch, like I didn't print it out and then try to make sure that my stripes matched up with it. I will link the card sketch in the description box below. I also have a link to my blog with the card sketch as a JPEG and pictures of my cards if you want to pin them to a Pinterest board. For me, it's a jumping off point. I'm just looking for something to get my creativity going because sometimes I don't know where to start, you know? And when I do things like this, like I thought I was going to make just this card, but once I started making it and just following the sketch, I found I had ideas on what else I could put on here or how else I might change that layout. And so the second card in this series is what happens while I'm making the first one. It's like the way my brain starts jumping around and going, oh, but what if I tried this? Okay, so I would love to know from you, do you use card sketches? Do you find them helpful? If so, are there particular kinds of card sketches that are your favorites? Do you want emergency card sketches? Are you looking for card sketches that have particular shapes that you like to include a lot? All of those things are helpful for me because I think I'm going to do more of this, right? The goal is to make this a series. I cut out the thank you twice from some thick black cardstock and I stacked it up, but you certainly could skip that part. You could add the double-sided adhesive and make these stickers. I followed Jennifer McGuire's advice and I bought some of the like scrapbook pages, photo pages. the ones that have the static cling business. So I have some die cuts that I have just stuck in pages like that. Again, so that I have some quick and easy cards. When I want something fancier than an emergency card, but I really don't have the time, this is what I do. Okay, and so there's our card, and it's got some great fancy accents in the silver cardstock, and you can see that glitter cardstock, that little bit of white. I love that one. Okay, so this is the card that I was daydreaming about while I was making the first one. So I took the largest of our arches and I cut it out of the middle of 3 panels of heavyweight white cardstock. Then I cut the same 2 smaller arches to go with it. I wanted to make something that looks kind of like a trellis. And so I have this circle quilt cover die from Altenew, and I thought if I cut an arch out of that, maybe it would look like a flower trellis. So I am going to cut that out of that same like shimmer cardstock from Michaels. And I am adding glue, not everywhere. That would take forever. And you know I don't have the patience for that. So just strategic dots in the middle, and then around the edges, I'm getting it real good. And when I go to cut the arch out of the middle of this, I will go back in with the fine tip of my glue bottle and glue down anything that looks like it's sticking up and shouldn't be. I'm adding this to a panel of white cardstock, nothing fancy, and I will give that a minute to dry. Probably I should have given it 2 or 3 because die cutting into wet glue is not the best, but it worked out. So I am centering, this is my middle arch, the same as that purple one, and I'm going to tape that down, and I will cut this out of the middle. That shimmer cardstock is like a 65-pound. It's pretty thin, so it easily cut through both layers of my cardstock, and I'm keeping that middle piece. I will make something else with that. I want my trellis to look like it's in the foreground, like it's raised up a little bit from the card, but I didn't want it raised as if I had added some really thick foam tape. So I cut 3 panels using a slightly larger arch to put behind it. If you don't want to do that, you could glue it flat to the card, or you could use foam tape. I just knew I was adding a lot to the card, and if I did as much lift as foam tape, it was gonna be a lot of foam tape. It was just gonna take longer. So in my mind, this was the easiest way to do it. I am going to glue my trellis on to those 3 layers, and I will flip this over, and you can see I didn't have to be exact with the placement of that larger arch. It is just enough bigger that as long as it was mostly centered, it was good to go. Okay, so I'm adding glue to the back of that, and then I'm going to add this whole thing to my card base, right? Again, I like wet glue for all of that. It really helps me line up the edges, and I don't have to worry about like putting it down wrong and then trying to lift it off with double-sided adhesive or something like that, right? Keep it simple. So I am adding my smaller white arch to my middle purple arch, and I'm starting at the top, okay? It's easy enough to get the bottom, but that top arch to me was the trickier part. So I always start with the trickiest part, or the part where I think my eye will be drawn to it first. When I add that to my card, it just kind of pops in like a puzzle piece and is recessed very slightly from the trellis. And I'll use the tip of my glue bottle to tack down any parts of the trellis that weren't glued all the way down and I think might cause me problems. We're going to use the Craft a Flower Open Peony die set as the floral on this, but really any floral would work. You could stamp something, you could use some ephemera. I love the Altenew Craft a Flower dies. I just think they have such incredible impact. And this is one of the newer ones. You can get it from Altenew, you can get it from scrapbook.com. There's lots of options. And it has a little keyhole in the middle. So you just line up the keyhole on the 3 layers to make sure you're getting everything at the right angle. So you're not sitting there studying the packaging, trying to figure it all out. This particular flower, this large piece right here, the sort of dainty one, it's a little bit tricky because if you're slightly off with your keyhole, this is covering lots of different petals, so it might not line up perfectly. I actually don't mind that because I end up just like clipping off any pieces that don't line up. That on the bottom right of the flower, there's a piece that doesn't line up quite like I want. So I clip it off, and then I just kind of round the corners of where I cut it, and I'll glue it down separately. I use really heavyweight cardstock in general. That's just what I have in my craft room. And so for me, if you've got 3 layers in this flower already, sometimes when it's overlapping multiple layers, that's a little tricky. This is the kind of thing where if you have some like 65-pound cardstock, that's a great idea. It works really, really well for these flowers because you're putting so many pieces together anyway. I don't think too hard about these flowers. I will either follow what's on the packaging color-wise, or I just pick a handful of colors that are like monochromatic. Okay, so I have 4 shades of purple, and they aren't even all the same shade, right? So the one in the far back, they're numbered when you look at the dies. So layer number 1, that purple has a little more red in it, and the others have a little more blue in it. It's gonna look beautiful. These always look beautiful. I also chose my color scheme because I was using a card challenge. So I had my sketch, and then I'm like, I don't know what colors to use, but the Altenew monthly inspiration challenge is a great place to start. I tend to go to like whoever the brand is and see if they have a challenge, because they usually go together pretty well. And their challenge is to use like purple and orange and green. So here's my flower. I love it so, so much. And it just, I want to pet it. There's so much texture and dimension there. And these leaves, here's the thing. I have been on the hunt for a good leaf die, just to have one to add as a little accent without a flower, just leaves. And I haven't seen one that I love. These are the leaves. I wasn't even thinking about them when I bought this, but there are 2 large leaf clusters, and then there's a small one that I'm not using that have this gorgeous, elegant shape. They're a good size. I will be using those on emergency cards, I can tell you right now. So I actually stacked up 2 layers of each leaf because that panel in the middle is a little bit recessed, and I didn't want it to get funky and warped or anything like that. But again, if you had just glued everything flat to the card, you would not have to do that. I'm using my flower to get my placement, and I glued the first one down pretty easily, but the second one, I was like, I don't know if I can get this right back where it was. So I just used my pencil to trace around the bottom where the flower is going to cover it up anyway. And that way, when I put my glue on there, I will get my leaf cluster exactly where I want it, and I won't smear glue anywhere else. I am using the Fancy Thanks die from Altenew. They have a handful of these fancy word dies, and I love them so much. They make everything look super fancy. So my favorites are the Fancy Thanks, the Fancy Yay, and the Fancy Celebrate. And I am layering that up twice because, again, I have that change in dimension from the trellis to the background arch. And the top layer is some glossy black cardstock. I just think it's a lot of fun. It adds a little element of shine without me having to do anything fancy. I haven't glued my flower down yet. I thought it would be easier to try to get the placement of this thanks before I did that, because I have a little bit of wiggle room in here. On the last card, we did it straight across and we had that sort of arch of stamping. This time I'm going at an angle. I was like, let's just change it up a little bit, right? And it overlaps just a little bit on the edge. I love that it's not entirely contained by the arch. I added some foam squares just on the very top of the flower because, again, we've got these changes in dimension. And I should have put glue all over the flower, but I wasn't thinking about it. So that's okay. We'll just stick our glue bottle in there. The Barely Art has that super fine tip, which is super helpful. And that finishes off our card. It takes a little longer than the first one, but not a lot. That flower comes together very quickly. And then we have 2 beautiful cards using the same card sketch. I would love it if you use this card sketch, if you would tag me. I'm on Instagram at Sassy's LLC and then here on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you next time.